In my last video, I looked at the British origins of speed metal. In today's video, I take a look at the American bands, and specifically the albums and releases that draw so much from NWOBHM. In fact, they draw so much from it that if you didn't know, you could confuse them as part of that movement. The first of these albums I'm going to look at is the most famous one. That's Kill 'Em All by Metallica. This album was released on the 25th of July 1983. Kill 'Em All isn't just Metallica's debut, it's arguably the big bang of thrash metal. It took the speed of the British heavy metal movement and injected it with the raw, chaotic American style. Lars's obsession with NWOBHM directly shaped the sound of Kill 'Em All. Lars flew from Los Angeles to London, specifically to see Diamond Head play at the Odeon. After the show, Lars was able to talk himself backstage, and the band was so impressed that he'd flown 5,000 odd miles just to be there, they essentially adopted him for the summer. He spent a week sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor of Brian Tatler's parents' house. He then moved into Sean Harris's house. He was the singer of Diamond Head at the time, and he spent nearly a month there. You can hear this NWOBHM influence throughout the album. It doesn't just borrow from Diamond Head though. It borrows from Saxon, it borrows from Venom, it borrows from Motorhead. Although he didn't appear on the album, as he was fired prior to its recording, in fact immediately prior to its recording, Dave Mustaine was the musical architect who took Diamond Head's riff style and weaponized it into what would be thrash metal. Mustaine himself credits Diamond Head guitarist Brian Tatler with teaching him how to write riffs. Mustaine said after hearing Diamond Head, it turned his songwriting upside down. Before then, he was playing more rock-orientated guitar. He would then become obsessed with riffs that were more technical, and these were directly inspired by Diamond Head. You can hear this influence in Mustaine's early contributions to Metallica with songs like Phantom Lord and Metal Militia. They mirror the busy, galloping fretwork of Diamond Head's debut, Lightning to the Nations. In fact, the influence between Metallica and Diamond Head in those early days is so strong that many people thought the song Am I Evil was actually a Metallica original. Many didn't realize how much of Metallica's early original sound was a direct tribute to Diamond Head's writing style. Mustaine even joked that they played Diamond Head covers so often and so well that people thought they were Metallica originals. Mustaine, of course, would then take the Diamond Head influence into his own band, Megadeth. He's written songs such as When from The World Needs a Hero, which is very similar to Am I Evil, and Crown of Worms. Crown of Worms was a mid-90s Megadeth track, which was heavily inspired by Diamond Head's The Prince. In fact, he even hired Sean Harris to help him write the lyrics for it. Dave Mustaine himself even plays guitar on Diamond Head's song Truckin', which is on their 1993 album Death and Progress. In 2020, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Lightning to the Nations, Diamond Head released a special edition of the album. This included a cover song of Metallica's No Remorse from Kill 'Em All. On Kill 'Em All, Metallica didn't just copy the NWOBHM sound though. They took the template and they cranked up the speed. They took the melodic guitar harmonies of bands like Iron Maiden and the no-frills working class grit of bands like Saxon, and they injected with the raw, powerful, uncompromising sounds of the likes of Motorhead and Venom. Of course, we now call this genre thrash metal. The next release I'm going to look at is March of the Saint by Armored Saint. Armored Saint is a band that doesn't get a lot of credit. Armored Saint is a band that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. They were formed in Los Angeles in 1982, and they were sort of a cornerstone of the American heavy metal movement of that time. Armored Saint were more directly influenced by NWOBHM than even Metallica were, and while they never reached the global stadium heights of the Big Four, they are still widely revered amongst the American metal movement, and they're well known for the vocals of John Bush. They burst on the scene with this album March of the Saint in 1984. They even got played on MTV with the song Can You Deliver? It was during this time that John Bush was famously asked to join Metallica, and he would turn them down. The sound on March of the Saint is heavily shaped by the likes of Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Saxon. And it is a landmark release in American heavy metal, and it serves as a bridge between the NWOBHM movement and the American metal scene of the time. Of course, Armored Saint's influence would grow further when John Bush joined Anthrax following their album Symbol of Salvation, and that wouldn't be the only case of crossover between Anthrax and Armored Saint. When Frankie Bello left Anthrax in 2004, it was Armored Saint bassist Joey Vera who stepped in. Vera would even record John Bush's vocals for Anthrax's album The Greater Two Evils in 2004. I still feel that not many people know March of the Saint, and it's a great album. It's one of my favourite albums. In fact, I bored my bandmates to tears banging on about how good this album is, and I would like more people to listen to it. It's very much in the vein of that British sound, but with that American edge. I think it's a great album. The next band I want to talk about is Queensrÿche. Of course, Queensrÿche now are very much seen as a progressive metal band. However, you go back to their original self-titled EP, you can clearly hear that NWOBHM influence. The original EP featured 4 tracks, which really showcased Jeff Tate's incredible vocal range. In fact, he has a lot in common with Bruce Dickinson on this release, and the guitar work itself is very Iron Maiden-esque. On their self-titled EP, you can hear there's a sonic bridge between the American heavy metal scene and the NWOBHM scene. They didn't just mimic the NWOBHM style, they refined it into something more technical and progressive. In fact, when Kerrang editors heard the EP in 1982, they gave it such a glowing review that they built a big fan base up in the UK. Nowadays, of course, they're better known for Operation Mindcrime and Empire, but the debut EP is definitely heavily influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal. Another band I'm going to talk about, and it's one of my favourite bands, is Riot, and specifically their release Far Down Under. They're often called the unluckiest band in the world, and they were actually formed in New York in 1975. The album I'm going to specifically refer to, though, is Far Down Under from 1981, the crown jewel of Riot's discography, and a landmark release in American heavy metal. The album is widely considered a masterpiece of the NWOBHM style, despite the band being from New York. It features the fan favourite anthems Swords and Tequila. British influence aside, it's very much a bridge between the hard rock of the 70s and the metal that was coming forward in the American scene in the 1980s. Legendary DJ Neil Cade championed Riot at the Soundhouse in London, which was at the epicentre of the NWOBHM movement. To the British kids in 1980, Riot wasn't just an American import, they were part of the scene. They're often regarded as honorary members of the new wave of British heavy metal. They influenced almost every major US power metal act that came after them. In fact, I had the honour of touring twice with Riot guitarist Rick Ventura and his band Riot Act. And on the second tour, they even played Far Down Under in full, which is a huge honour for me because it's one of my favourite albums of all time. And they treated us exceptionally well. And it will go down as one of my favourite memories of playing music, to be frank. The final release I'm going to take a look at is Crystal Logic by Manila Road. Now, I was totally unaware of Manila Road until many reviewers started to compare my band Kaine with them back in 2014. They were using it almost as an insult, and it happened so often that I thought, I'm going to check these guys out. I listened to their discography, and the album that stuck out for me was Crystal Logic. Now, having listened to the earlier Manila Road stuff, Crystal Logic is the moment the band sort of changed its sound, became more of a raw sword and sorcery heavy metal band. But like the other bands I've mentioned on this list, it bridged that gap between NWOBHM and what was happening in America at the time. But of course, they had an influence on power metal in America as well. Crystal Logic sounds like it could have come from the NWOBHM movement. Mark Shelton's guitar work is deeply rooted in that British sound. Tracks like Necropolis have a galloping rhythm and raw production that was defined in the UK underground in the early 80s. Of course, nowadays, Manila Road is considered one of the forefathers of US power metal. So those, for me, are the American albums and bands that are most influenced by that British sound from that time period. Of course, many of the American bands that were inspired by the NWOBHM movement were going to be much bigger than the NWOBHM bands themselves. A lot of the NWOBHM bands in Britain were let down by bad labels and bad management. Bands like Diamond Head should have been a lot bigger, but they weren't managed well. The labels did not treat them well. And that goes for bands like Tigers of Pantang and Praying Mantis to some degree. There are other bands that did well, like Venom did reasonably well, but again, they never reached the same heights as the American bands. America just had a better infrastructure. It's more commercial. The American incentive is to make as much money as possible. And I think with the British scene, there was a lot more politics and chances involved with it, which really damaged it. And a lot of the bands at the time. There were so many good bands and they never got the opportunity because, frankly, shysters in the British music industry signed them, did nothing with them, took all the money and left them for dead. And it happened with so many different bands. So that being said, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I'm Rage, I'm from the band Kaine. We've recently put out our new album, Extinction's End. It's less NWOBHM influence than some of our other releases, but it is speed metal. If you like speed metal and thrash metal and a heavier type of sound of metal, you might enjoy our new album. And that was released on Saturday. It's available on CD, vinyl, and across all streaming platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your music from, it's available on. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.